Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend Caller. What if with another fiction? What if Deku Journey of Hope and Unexpected Love? Now, before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. Izuku's feet took a shaky first step, but then continued to move decisively. Between sobs and efforts to wipe his face with the sleeves of his high school uniform, he told himself that he already knew. He'd known about it for years, but until that moment he'd kept a tiny little hope inside of him. The sky was blue, and a gentle breeze was blowing around him. Moreover, that day he had met the hero he most admired. He had personally saved his life, and had an autograph from him, so it wasn't too bad, he told himself, trying to force a smile, getting closer and closer to the edge of the roof. Why had he met All Might? Had it really been a fluke, or had it been fate? Perhaps to spare him more suffering, so that he will forget to follow a path that will eventually end fatally. All Might, he had just confirmed that his dream was just that, an unrealistic dream. And he understood well what he said. He really understood and thanked him. But it had been too hard to listen. I knew I couldn't be a hero without a gift. I already knew that, but still. In his last step into the void, Deku closed his eyes, trying to force a smile, and his right foot was suspended for what seemed like an eternity before he began to fall. He didn't know why All Might had to leave so quickly a few moments ago. Maybe if she'd stayed with him a little longer, she wouldn't have felt so alone. He continued to fall, and in an instant he saw various fragments of his life. Like when his mother hugged him when he was 4 years old, apologizing to him in tears. Her little 5-year-old self, stifling the tears behind her bedroom door, while her parents argued in the living room about something she no longer remembered. Then his father, closing the door behind him, and his mother holding him tightly so he wouldn't follow him. Surely that was why he had been so torn apart by All Might's words. Why, since his father had left, in Izuku's mind, All Might had been the closest thing to a father figure he'd ever had. Izuku winced. At ground level, someone else's feet started a race, touching his shoes quickly and jumping in Izuku's direction, dropping his school briefcase. In Izuku's mind, the most recent memories of the day began to appear. Kachin pushed him straight to the ground, telling him he was useless. Kachin destroying and throwing his notebook out the window. Himself being trapped and suffocated by that mud monster. And finally to All Might, with his imposing, muscular back, apparently wiping a small scratch on the corner of his mouth, jumping off the ceiling and waving goodbye with a small hand gesture. Taga! The sudden scream made Izuku widen his eyes. Still falling and on his head, he saw a girl reaching out with all her might to try to get to him. In slow motion, he thought he saw that 4 fingers were already touching his hand, and opening his eyes wide, he realized what it was. It was in one of his hero analysis notebooks. Whatever his quirk was, he had to touch it with all 5 fingers for it to take effect. It was crazy that he thought of those kinds of details at such a time. But at least it managed to distract him a little from his current situation, without thinking about it. And perhaps also because of the look of effort the girl was making to touch him. Izuku moved his pinky finger to complete the union of the 5 fingers, and it seemed to him that something changed immediately. He suddenly found himself less than 2 meters above the ground and kicked headfirst in the air, not knowing what to do now. The girl kept making a strained face, closing her eyes tightly and putting the fingers of both hands together until she couldn't take it anymore. Izuku fell first, and then the girl on top of him, rubbing her head a little, but reacting almost immediately. The girl pulled away from him a little to look him straight in the face. It seemed to Izuku that she was surprised to see him more closely, but coming out of that initial reaction, she looked at him with renewed concern. Heavens! Are you okay? Huh. Why I? He tried to formulate Izuku without much success, and trying to back away to separate himself a little. First of all, ashamed of what he had tried to do, and a little because of the girl's close face. However, When he tried to stand up, he was mortified by a sharp pain in his leg. They both instantly noticed the strange angle his right leg had acquired, the result of not being able to land well. Izuku paled completely. She covered her mouth to hold back a scream. The image of the young woman who had saved him faded into the darkness, until he lost consciousness. Ochako Uraraka tried to call for help from passers-by who were still bent over next to the unconscious green-haired boy, but they all seemed to be heading quickly in the other direction. "Excuse me," caught the attention of a man talking on his cell phone who looked agitated. "Could you call an ambulance from your cell phone?" The man seemed to pay little attention to Ochako, but fortunately pointed out that several ambulances were already parked on the corner. "How convenient." "What's wrong?" he asked, not understanding why people were still rushing in that direction. "A boy has been caught by a monster of slime and mud. There are already several heroes in the place, but apparently none of them have the right quirk to fight him." Deciding not to worry about it at that time, Ochako again touched the green-haired boy to make him levitate and hurriedly carried him in his arms to one of the ambulances. From Bakugo's point of view, there were many heroes around him, trying to harm that disgusting slime monster that was slowly suffocating him. But they seemed so weak and incompetent. I couldn't believe those idiots were calling themselves professional heroes. She closed her eyes tightly, and her tears overflowed unintentionally. He remembered the idiot Deku, who always seemed to want to help others, but lacked the strength to do so. Always crying but with fists up. Those were the kind of people who always died first uselessly. It made him angry. Pathetic, pathetic. He wanted to scream, but couldn't quite do it. "Pathetic," said one of those present, as he leaned over the wall to cough up blood. "I have to." A hand on his shoulder caught All Might's attention in his most unflattering form, and when he saw who it was, he tried to crack a smile through gritted teeth. "Help is already on the way, so don't force it anymore. It's not good for you," said Tsukachi, the city's police chief. 3 luminous red dots appeared on the monster, and when the nearest heroes noticed this, they quickly backed away, trying to get the crowd to do the same. On the other side of the wall, 3 armored agents rappelled down using flamethrowers, which effectively caused the monster to writhe. Still trapped, Bakugo felt himself sweating from the heat of the flamethrowers, while the pressure in his arms was released a little. Then he saw his chance. With a wicked smile, he opened the palms of his hands and sparks began to spark. "No, I won't forgive you. Never. Die." "Is he dying?" Everyone present repeated in astonishment. A huge explosion emerged from the alley into the sky, illuminating everything around him for an instant. Then large chunks of mud began to fall, but the monster was no longer moving. "He's very strong," the police chief acknowledged, as All Might stared at him speechlessly. Opening his eyes, the first thing Izuku saw was All Might, albeit in an action figure on the shelf in front of his bed. Had it all been a dream? As he tried to sit up, and to Izuku's dismay, he found his leg in a cast, his eyes swollen, and a feeling of deep emptiness in his chest. A rather real memory came to his mind instantly. "I'm sorry. You can't be a hero without a quirk." Again, the tears overflowed, and Izuku had to squeeze his shirt tightly to his chest to try to control himself. The door to his bedroom began to open, and Izuku quickly rubbed his eyes to dry himself. He immediately recognized the kind girl who had saved him, carrying a tray of food and instinctively lowering the look in embarrassment. "That's good. You've already woken up," he said, placing the tray on the table next to him and smiling genuinely. That is, until he noticed that Izuku kept his eyes down without saying anything. "Please," she said, bowing in front of him to bow. "Forgive me for using my quirk on you. It's because of me that you injured your leg." Finally, Izuku raised his face to look at her, still bowing, and his mouth opened, as the tears began to overflow little by little. Who was this girl? And how could she be so good to him? Hearing no answer, Ochako looked up and saw that Izuku Midoriya, as his mother had told him his name, was crying inconsolably. "Does something hurt?" she said worriedly, about to touch him. "Izuku." He called his mother behind the back of the kind girl, who stepped aside so she could hug him. "I was so worried because you wouldn't wake up," she said, crying as she checked every inch of his face and arms. "Mom?" he murmured softly for some context. "This girl kindly brought you home after you had received recovery girl's care." Her mom wiped her nose with a tissue and smiled a little. "We owe this young woman a lot." Izuku made another effort to get up as Ochako Uraraka raised both palms in front of them. "No, actually," she said, blushing a little at the mother-son nod. "I was just apologizing to your son for using my quirk on him without his consent. I've heard of cases where that has ended very badly. The truth is," he tried to say Ochako, but was speechless halfway through. For a moment Izuku remembered what he heard him scream, before opening his eyes as he fell, and inwardly he pondered if he had mistaken him for someone else, and that's why he had saved him. A new chest spasm came in like an awl, and he couldn't help but press his shirt with a fist into his chest. They both looked at him worriedly, though their mother's gaze suddenly became somewhat more stern. "When I went to school to report your disability, some kids in your classroom told me that a boy named Bakugo has been bothering you for a long time." Izuku felt a big chill, knowing in advance where he wanted to go with it. His mother grabbed him by both shoulders and faced him, trying to hold back her tears, but Izuku looked away. "Why didn't you tell me?" The silence stretched infinitely as mother and son now looked at each other with teary eyes. "It's not what you think," he said in barely a thin voice. "I want you to tell me," he said, squeezing his shoulders slightly. "Tell me if it was that Bakugo or one of his friends, the one who pushed you out of the building." Izuku covered his mouth with both hands, shocked that his mom would ask him so directly, although he had already seen it coming, and shook his head hard. With some discomfort, Ochako was distracted by the decoration of Izuku's room. "By the way," he said, remembering something, "a few moments before I saw you fall from the building, I saw All Might running down the street and coming from that direction. That's why I flipped. How lucky, isn't it?" His mom looked at him with a new kind of sternness. "Izuku, does this have anything to do with All Might?" Izuku continued to cover his mouth, and tears again overflowed from his eyes, somehow giving him away. Her mother frowned. "Don't tell me you wanted to ask him for an autograph and tried to follow him when he jumped off the roof," his mom ventured to guess. Izuku continued to cover his mouth without saying anything and lowered his head a little. Her mom sighed before standing up. "You've taken this fanaticism too far, Izuku." "But it's over," she chided him, taking all the dolls and posters in the room, putting them in a box and taking them with her. Izuku made no attempt to stop her, but she stopped in the doorframe. "I do this because I want you to realize that there is not only All Might in this life, and that I'm the one who's here with you." Izuku, unable to hold on anymore, dropped back onto the bed and covered his eyes with both forearms. That was true. He never stopped to think about how his mother would have felt if she had died in that fall. Alone again, Ochako and Izuku remained silent for quite a while. "As I was saying before, I'm sorry," Ochako said, but Izuku didn't dare to remove his arms from his face. "It seems that I screwed up again." Izuku fervently shook his head in the same position, not daring to look at her. "Well, I think it's been a lot of emotions for a day. I'll let you rest a bit, but I'll come back tomorrow to see how you're doing. So see you." Ochako left the room and closed behind him. She stood leaning on the other side of the door for a few seconds, and the image of a smiling boy who was undoubtedly very much like Izuku Midoriya came to her mind. "Wow," he said with a blank stare. Inside the room, Izuku continued with her arms covering him, feeling the tears still not stop. He tried to calm down, and looking at the ceiling, he thought that despite everything that had happened, He had at least been able to talk to a girl for the first time. He was slowly drowning in foul mud, and although he was struggling to get out of it, he was still sinking. All that was left was his hand outside, trying to hold on to something, but there was nothing. Bakugo woke up suddenly in what was evidently a hospital room, and as he turned around, he saw his mother with an expression that he did not like in the least. Was it pity for him? "What stupid face are you making? Enough is enough." His mother approached him slowly and completely changed her expression. She slapped him. "Touch me again, and you'll lose your hand. I can't believe I spoiled you so much, and I'm not saying I'm happy that monster almost killed you, but maybe you deserved it a little." Huh? Again, another slap in the face. "I told you enough is enough. Is it true that you've been bothering a boy in your class?" Bakugo let out a small snort. "So what? He's useless without a quirk." Seeing the third slap coming, Bakugo caught his mother's hand in midair, not expecting that his mother would hit him in the nose quite hard using the other hand. Bakugo snarled in response. "Ma'am, please," said the doctor behind her back. Maybe Bakugo is not to blame for being like that. "Do you think there might be a reason?" asked Bakugo's mother, rubbing her wrist. "Don't talk about me like I'm not here with a demon," the boy complained, still holding his nose. "We did several lab tests to make sure there won't be any traces of the mud monster left on your son's body. And at the same time, we realized that his testosterone levels are excessively high, probably as a side effect of his quirk. In a woman like you, who does not produce this substance naturally, the same would not happen. But in someone of the male sex, it can manifest itself as severe changes in mood with a tendency to aggressiveness and violence. This woman should be tested anyway. As far as I'm concerned, he's almost a tomboy." Bakugo's mother threatened him with her fist from a distance, being hindered by the doctor's arm. "I recommend that you inject him with this drug every day," he said, handing him boxes and syringes. "And maybe you'll see some improvements in a while." "Thank you for helping me with this," All Might said, sipping a large cup of coffee, staring for a moment at his reflection with eyes sunk into the liquid inside. "It's nothing," said the police chief, taking one last sip from his own cup of coffee. "I must admit that I was also interested in that boy Bakugo, after seeing the way he got rid of that monster with a single attack. But to tell the truth, what I found is very unflattering, and I doubt you like it," he said, handing him a folder. On the first page, he found a photo of the boy in question with general information such as age, weight, and qualities of his quirk. But as he turned to the next few pages in the school records, All Might quickly realized what his friend was referring to. He seems to be doing well in school, but he has a problem because of his explosive temper. Maybe with some drugs and professional help. I wish it was just that. It seems like he's kind of abusive to a particular boy in his class." All Might turned the pages until he found the information that the police chief was referring to, and his eyes widened. The young man with green hair and freckles was unmistakable. It was the same one he'd rescued from the mud monster, and then asked if he could be a hero without owning a quirk. "I was really sorry that I had been so curt with him, but it was very important that no one knew the truth about the peace symbol. I tried to look him up to get his own side of the story," the police chief said, lighting a cigarette. "You know, to find out if Bakugo is really an abuser, or just a teenager who doesn't know how to measure his strength well." Who actually seemed more interested in me continuing his story. But I couldn't find it. The boy he was teasing, Izuku Midoriya, is on disability after falling from a building a few blocks from where Bakugo was caught by the monster. Apparently Bakugo had previously told Midoriya that he should commit suicide, since he doesn't have a quirk, and also ridiculed him for wanting to enter the hero race at the UA. All Might stood up to the surprise of the police chief, and his countenance became rather annoyed as he gritted his teeth. "Annoyed with myself. And a big deal to young Bakugo for saying such a terrible thing. Fortunately, it didn't get any worse." A young woman who was passing by, with the quirk of levitating things, could have intervened in time. But they ended up falling badly and young Midoriya broke his foot. Do you happen to know where young Midoriya lives? No, but, he said, hanging his cigarette at the corner of his mouth and typing into his computer. I can find out in a few minutes. Thank you. Are you planning to go visit him? Yes, definitely, All Might said with a decided air. I just hope it's not too late. Izuku's mother watched with great concern as her son, with the huge cardboard box in his hands, filled with all the All Might's things, including the curtains in his room. It was a relief to see her son back on his feet, thanks to Recovery Girl's quick recovery effect. But he sensed that something very bad was happening to him. I'm going to leave this in the corner. If I remember correctly, today is the day they pick up this kind of thing, she said, making her way through the entrance until her mother crossed her path. You don't have to do this, Izuku, he said, blowing his nose with a handkerchief and his eyes glazed over. I just wanted to teach you a little lesson. But that doesn't mean you have to throw your stuff away. Izuku also looked at his mom with some concern, and leaving the box on the table gave her a hug. Perhaps at another time she would have cried at such a moment, but at last she felt that her tears had run out. He had also decided to show himself stronger to his mother, so that she would not worry so much about him. I've been thinking about what you told me, and I really don't need all these things anymore if I have you. And you're right. I took this fanaticism to the extreme, and I almost lost my life. I shouldn't have given so much importance to one person. Izuku tried to suppress those intense feelings that had overwhelmed him. It's like the hero Hawks said in an interview. Sometimes out of the desire to want to save the world, we forget those who are closest to us, even our families. But I promise you that from now on, before I do anything, I will also think about your feelings. Izuku, his mom said, hugging him even tighter, and when she looked up to look at him, she was surprised that her son was forcing a smile. So I'm definitely going to follow a different path than All Might. His mom finally let go of him, a little more surprised, and Izuku took advantage of this to resume his exit from the house with the box. I'll be back in a moment, he said by way of farewell. On the street, Izuku noticed that it was another day of blue skies and gentle breezes. Placing the box in one hand, I noticed that there was a nice trail of clouds where a plane had once passed. He followed the trail with his finger in a straight line until he came back into view of the street and saw a tall, very thin blonde man with sunken eyes in front of him. Ah, Izuku was surprised, throwing the box to the floor and revealing its contents. The man gritted his teeth at the sight of the young man bending down to pick up the All Might's action figures, which had come off, and decided to help him. I'm sorry, said the boy as he received one of the figures from the stranger's hand. Are you going to throw this away? The man asked, distracted by another of the figures and looking at her carefully in front of her face. Yes, Izuku admitted, although when he saw that the man delved deeper into the contents of the box, he smiled a little embarrassed. They looked straight into each other's eyes, and it seemed to Izuku that there was something sadder about the man's gaze, beyond his physical appearance. Maybe he had some disease that made him look that way, and seeing him with the figure of All Might in his hand, he couldn't help but think that he was the totally opposite image of the smiling hero. Don't you admire the hero All Might? The stranger asked. I think All Might is the greatest hero ever. I've always been a big fan, and you know. Personally, he saved me from the attack of a horrible monster that tried to suffocate me, and for that I am eternally grateful. Izuku paused before continuing and lowered his gaze a little. But after I saved myself, I realized that in reality I will never be like him, no matter how hard I try. I think after my father left, I started to think of All Might as a kind of father figure, as a role model, from which I could follow in his footsteps. But without a quirk, I now realize that's practically impossible. And I must admit that I felt very sad about it. Looking up again, Izuku realized that the blonde man was crying over his story. Please don't feel bad for me, the boy said, handkerchief to the stranger. There are many other things I can do with my life. All Might kindly recommended me to go to the police, and I think he might be right. Although I haven't made a final decision yet. The man stood up and looked at him with new determination in his eyes. Then I'll help you. In front of Izuku's eyes, there was something heroic in those words, and the reflection of the morning light behind him made this man look stronger than he had seemed at first. The dismissal bell ended another day of school for Izuku, who headed for the exit with a disgruntled expression, trying to reflect on all the changes that had occurred recently in his life. The first significant change had been that the man she met on the street, a sort of retired personal trainer, and who she now knew was called Yagi Toshinori, had gone to talk to her mother to convince her to let him train him in the mornings, apparently as a way to strengthen his body and mind. Something he had said was necessary for whatever path he decided to take, and he had promised to introduce him to the city's chief of police, so that he would allow him to take a special course and see if he would like to work for the police. As he had told Mr. Toshinori, he still wasn't sure if that was the path he wanted to take, but it was worth giving him a chance. A cheerful girl called to him in the distance by the door, causing him to blush a little at the insistent gaze of others. Surely he could tell, from the uniform, that he was coming from another high school to see him. That had been the second big change in his life. The kind girl, who he now knew, was called Ochako Uraraka, had come to see him every day after school to walk together to the station. They were always talking about interesting things like heroes or news, and he definitely wanted to keep seeing her every day. But deep down, a part of him wondered the real reason why she had continued to visit him after she had recovered, and that, at times, made him feel a little strange. A small snort from behind made Izuku's skin crawl. To one side, Deku, Kachin complained behind him, noticing until now that he had stopped walking because he was meditating on his things. I'm sorry, Kachin, he said, stepping aside to let him pass, noticing that the expression on his face had changed a little. Lately, he looked more serious than usual, and that in turn made him look intimidating, but in another way that he didn't know how to define well. Ultimately, that was the biggest change in Izuku's daily life. For some reason, Kachin had stopped messing with him, and he wondered if that had been in the wake of the incident they'd had with the mud monster. Unlike him, Kachin had been able to fight the monster and win. All in all, there was a big gap between the two of them. Perhaps Kachin had already realized that there was no point in upsetting someone who was definitely not on his level. "Is that the guy who used to bother you?" asked Uraraka next to him. "But it seems like they get along a lot better now." Why are you saying that, Uraraka?" Izuku asked, moving away a little, since he still hadn't quite gotten used to him getting so close and unexpected. "I heard he told you that you can. You know, Deku." Again, Izuku became nervous. No. It actually refers to the other way of reading my name in kanji, something like useless. It was something he said when we were learning to read, but the truth is that he told me so much that he lost the meaning of the insult. Uraraka clasped his hands with an almost radiant smile. "Well, you should make sense of it as you want from now on. As far as I'm concerned, the Deku that means you can. It's a nice nickname." Ochako began to jump his fist into the sky, repeating Deku over and over again. You can call me Deku if you want," he said, red as a tomato. "That's what I'll do," she said, still smiling, as she began to walk toward the exit. Suddenly, however, a large crowd of students had gathered in front of the entrance and were not allowed to leave. In front of Bakugo appeared a boy with blonde hair, followed by students who clearly belonged to other institutes. "So you are Katsuki Bakugo, the one everyone talks about? They say that you are interested in entering the UA this year, and I came to apply, since I also plan to take the exam. My name is Nito Monoma, and it's nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand with a somewhat exaggerated bow. "Move," replied the other, rejecting his hand with a slap of the hand. "Oh right. I had already been told. although I had to check it myself. In addition to having played the role of victim for a long time, they say that you are the most arrogant of them, all since you defeated that third-rate monster. But know that that alone is not enough to get into a school as prestigious as the UA. The students on Bakugo's side recoiled, quite frightened by what they had just heard Monoma say, sure of what kind of Bakugo's response would be now. Uraraka watched as Deku swallowed heavily, not losing sight of what was about to happen. I want you to leave and never come back. Do you understand? To everyone's surprise, the strange fellow began to laugh extravagantly. What? What did you say? I couldn't hear you if you speak so softly. What happened to the Dai energy that you said to that drool monster? Because it was something like that, right? Die, shouted Monoma with a huge explosion into the sky that astonished everyone and left them speechless. Everyone except Midoriya, who began to whisper with himself, but everyone could hear him. I can't believe it. Does he have the same quirk as Kachin? No, that would be very rare. If firepower is already rare, explosives are even rarer. Maybe 1 person in 3 million has that quirk. But even if it was the same, that looked too much like the kind of explosions Kachin uses. So his quirk must be the one to copy quirks. Monoma adjusted her hair with a drop of bewilderment at being caught in her trick so quickly, but recovering almost instantly in her arrogant attitude. You see, what you did wasn't really that impressive. What I think is that you actually like to get attention, and that's why you played the victim for so long, hoping to be saved. But as you could see, real heroes like All Might were too busy to deal with your victim delusions. This finally managed to annoy Bakugo, who tried to grab him by the collar of his shirt. But Monoma was faster and dodged him to the other side. And from what I see, you're kind of slow too. That will be bad for the new scheme in the UA entrance examination. New, growled Bakugo, preparing to unleash a punch. That's right, Monoma said, dodging the first and subsequent blows, and suddenly seemed to slip under Bakugo's outstretched arm. On his last blow, and as if suddenly everything was in slow motion, he stuck bunny stickers on 3 parts of the back to Bakugo's great bewilderment. As far as I'm concerned, I won't have to worry about you during the exams, and it was all a big media hype. Monoma began to laugh again in an extravagant way. What a loser, sneered Monoma, pointing at him. You, said Bakugo, starting to spark from the palms of his hands. You. That's enough, said a beautiful red-haired girl with a long ponytail, slapping Monoma on the back of the neck and holding him like a dog by the neck. You should be ashamed of yourself. Then he gave everyone a bow as a sign of apology and farewell. Everyone watched as the off-campus students left, leaving them with a feeling of disbelief on their faces at how it had all ended so pathetically. On the train home, Uraraka leaned over to Deku's cell phone a little so he could see the information they were looking for. For a moment in his position, Uraraka realized that this time Deku had not been flustered by his approach. Maybe he was finally getting used to her presence, or maybe it was because he was really focused on this. With a smile, I wish it was the latter, because seeing him turn red seemed abnormal in a boy, and therefore extremely adorable. Here it is, Deku announced. It says that the new director of the UA, Shouta Aizawa, decided, as the first change in his administration, to modify the entrance exam at the UA, which had been in place for more than 2 decades. And what happened to the previous little director? Asked Ochako, imagining the smiling, friendly former director barking. Apparently, he decided to leave teaching for a while to devote himself to his political career. He wants to be the next mayor of the city. Oh, I see, Ochako said, imagining him wearing a little mayor's hat. Deku's face was still serious as he passed the information over his cell phone. This is what Monoma should have been referring to, he said, bringing Uraraka his cell phone with a silhouette of a human body and 3 kinds of red lights on the body. The first filter to enter the UA will be a competition in which the applicant must avoid being marked on 3 sensors attached to his body and in turn mark 3 other candidates to disqualify them. Thus, the new director contemplates giving equity to applicants who have quirks different from those based on physical strength, such as the psychic or ick type. Previously, the exam consisted of fighting with robots and collecting points. Like in a video game, Uraraka said, and Deku nodded. In a competition like this, Kachin wouldn't have the slightest difficulty getting in. But from what we could see today, agility has become something really fundamental. I think the ability to think fast could also be a game changer, he said, noting it. We're all impressed by your ability to analyze Monoma's quirk so quickly. Are you sure that's not your quirk? Have you ever done ick tests? Finally, Deku began to blush and make funny hand gestures, much to Uraraka's delight. My mom took me to a lot of tests, including ick tests, but it turned out that I was only slightly above average. But nothing that you can brag about, let alone qualify as an ick quirk. Still, it was awesome, Uraraka smiled, and Deku had to cover his entire face with his forearms to bear it. Oh, this is my stop, Uraraka said, getting up. See you tomorrow. Deku nodded, not fully uncovering his face. Would he ever manage to properly say goodbye to her? I wasn't sure about that. Hello, how have you been? Said the police chief as he greeted All Might in his office, noticing at first his suit and tie set. Don't forget to send my congratulations to the new director Eraserhead. Yes, replied All Might, taking a seat and starting to smoke as he detransformed with a tired air. Although I've begun to fear for this year's would-be heroes. It seems that Aizawa won't think twice about disqualifying any prospect he doesn't think is suitable. I remember hearing him say that there's nothing crueler than someone giving hope to someone without talent. All Might reflected on that. But discarding someone so quickly can also be very cruel. The comment struck the police chief as a bit odd, but he decided to get to the point. Yes, anyway. The reason I called you is because we need your help to investigate a case, he said, handing a folder to All Might. He waited for him to read the first page on his own before continuing. So Endeavor's son is missing. Actually, so far we have strong reason to think he fled, the police chief said, asking him to turn the page. I can't give you all the details, but Endeavor's family has been on the decline since the death of his first son Toya. And it appears that Endeavor was pushing his son too hard to be his successor. It is unlikely, but the last we heard was that he was preparing for the UA entrance exams, given that the recommendation system was also annulled by the new director. I see. I'll keep an eye out, All Might replied, looking at the face of Endeavor's son in the file photo, noting the burn scar on his face. He couldn't help but press his teeth with some anger. It was unbelievable that Endeavor would do that to his own son. In the darkness of the night, a flash of lightning lit up Todoroki's face as he set aside scrap metal to take shelter from the approaching storm. Of course, he had never imagined himself in such a precarious situation, but he told himself that anything was better than continuing to live in the same house with his father's madmen. Now that he had a shelter of the least adequate place to spend the night, he thought for a moment of making a fire for warmth, but he gave up at once, refusing to use that power, which he felt had never belonged to him. Or rather, that I had never wished to have. Exhausted, he tried to settle down and immediately fell asleep, still rubbing his eyes from the dream of having to get up before dawn. The first thing Deku saw when he arrived at the beach where Mr. Toshinori had summoned him was the man doing pull-ups with a ball. Skillfully enough, if I was to admit it. Soccer? Exclaimed Izuku, receiving the ball with his hands. That's right, young Midoriya. We're going to play soccer today. Not to brag, but I lived in Brazil for a while. But this is nothing like the exercises we've been doing so far. Exactly. Today, we will work on reaction speed and agility. In Izuku's mind came the memory of Monoma dodging all of Kachin's blows, and he told himself that he too would like to learn how to do something like that. "Okay," he said decisively. "That's the way I like it," he said, passing her strange white gloves that appeared to have sensors on their fingertips and soccer cleats and knee pads, joined together in one piece. "What is this?" "Just something I borrow from the UA engineering area." "And how did he do it?" "That's a secret," he said. Deku was already used to that kind of response and started putting it on, feeling somewhat weird at first. At times he felt that Mr. Toshinori was making fun of him. But in the end, thanks to his help with the morning workouts, he had begun to notice some changes in his physical complexion. And that made him feel more confident in himself. "The first thing you're going to do is try to hit the target over there using the ball," he said, pointing to a boy in the sea quite far from the shore. "But that's impossible." Mr. Toshinori proceeded to take the ball out of his hands, and with a single, forceful kick hit the target on the boy without any problems. "It's not a problem of strength, but rather of focusing energy on a single point. As you can see, today we have the tide in our favor, so the balls will be coming back eventually." Deku noticed a net bag filled with a lot of balls. "And what will happen to the project to clean up the beach?" asked Deku, concentrating on the target of the boy, which kept moving with the flow of the water. "Let me worry about that," Mr. Toshinori replied. On his first kick, Deku was impressed to notice that the ball came within the distance of the boy, although it failed to hit the target. Mr. Toshinori scratched his chin slightly, apparently also impressed. "Do these things help focus energy?" "Something like that." Deku looked at the gloves and shoes for a moment before continuing. He was starting to like those things. "I'll come in the evening to clean up the beach," Deku proposed, setting up a second ball to kick. "Then we'll see if you have the energy left to do that, young Midoriya. Remember that as today is Sunday, we will train until noon, and this will be the lightest thing we will do today." Deku's face looked slightly worried about that sentence. No doubt Mr. Toshinori had shown himself to be a very stern coach. Deciding not to worry in advance, he proceeded to kick the ball again with all his might. This time the ball seemed to be going straight for the target, until, "Wow," said the boy with big red wings, stopping the ball in the air and starting to do some pull-ups. "Sorry, but when I see a ball I can't resist. It's Hawks." Despite young Midoriya's astonishment in All Might's mind, he began an internal dialogue, maintaining a serious countenance on the outside. Hawks was known within the business for working on rather obscure matters involving senior government officials and troublesome heroes. Despite his young age, in the last year he had achieved success in solving cases almost on par with Endeavor, and that is certainly impressive. But something about the way he worked did not generate much confidence. As if reading his thoughts, he suddenly saw the winged hero's intentions. "Long pass," shouted Hawks, sending the ball back with incredible force aimed straight at All Might, who only frowned. However, it was Midoriya who stepped up to the front to parry the ball with both hands, creating great friction and sending it skyward to deny it. "Fayu," Midoriya sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Sorry, Hawks apologized, landing on the shore in front of them. "I think I need to improve my passing accuracy." "Are you okay, young Midoriya?" worried All Might as he stood up. "Yes. These gloves and shoes are truly amazing, Mr. Toshinori. Whoever created them is definitely a genius. Actually, I think it's a girl." "Ah, I'm sorry. I didn't want to assume that only men study engineering, but yes, I understand you. It's like the profession of heroes, which at first had few women. That's what I thought." Hawks cleared his throat as he realized he had been ignored. "I'm sorry to interrupt such a pleasant conversation, but I'd like to ask you if you have seen anything or anyone strange around." Deku stepped up. "We always come here to train in the mornings. But so far we haven't seen anyone suspicious around. If we see anything, we will immediately report it to the police." "And what do you say, Mr. Toshinori?" asked Hawks, very close to his face. All Might frowned again. "I haven't seen anything." "Really? Because it seems to me that you look a little suspicious." "Mr. Toshinori is a good man," Midoriya tried to intercede, until the man stopped him. "Don't worry, young Midoriya. I'm used to being played because of my looks. I myself would be suspicious of myself if he saw me on the street. So I think it's best to talk to the hero Hawks a little bit to dispel any traces of doubts. Please don't take me for prejudiced, Midoriya," Hawks said with a smile. "It will be just small talk to rule out any details this kind man may tell me, and you'll have Mr. Toshinori back." "Okay," Izuku agreed, still a little worried. "Keep doing this workout until you've done it 100 times, and then move on to doing 100 pull-ups in a row without dropping the ball." 100 pull-ups. But it's my first time playing with a soccer ball. Lord Toshinori walked over and affectionately placed his hand on Midoriya's head. "I know you can do it." Izuku didn't know what caused it, but for a brief moment an almost mystical connection seemed to bring him and Lord Toshinori together. Something warm and bright. And the man seemed to notice it too, because he gave her a smile that Midoriya couldn't help but think was quite pleasant and tried to replicate it in response. "I'm glad you're smiling again, young Midoriya," thought All Might happily. "Come on, Mr. Toshinori," Hawks said later, turning his back on the scene, as if that seemed too cheesy. "The sooner we leave, the sooner we'll be back." The man quickened his pace so he could catch up with Hawks, and Midoriya watched them walk away from the beach. Inadvertently, he touched his hair where it had been crushed and soon returned to his training. "I'm not liking this," said Bakugo, recoiling from the injection his mother had in his hand. "I think that crap is just doping me, making my explosions less potent and slowing me down to react." "Well, maybe if you trained more you could fix it," the woman said, catching his arm and injecting it in one go. "You see, if an old lady like you could catch me so easily, I don't know what I could pass in the UA entrance exam." Her mother crushed her hair for a moment, which she knew irritated her quite a bit. "I'll just tell you one more time. Entry na for this, and stop being so arrogant at once." Bakugo grunted in response and walked out. "Don't you think you're being a little him?" her husband asked from the table. "For a long time I spoiled him because I liked him to get compliments for his quirk. But that only turned him into a silly braggart. From now on he will have to try harder, and find that if he doesn't he could become a burden to someone else." The woman looked out the window at a nearby tree as its branches fluttered. "Let's cut to the chase," All Might asked without losing his serious countenance. "If this is for the case of Endeavor's son." "Oh, no, no," Hawks denied with his finger. "We are certainly concerned about the disappearance of young Todoroki, and we think that we will soon be able to locate him to return him to his loving father. But that is not the reason why I dared to interrupt your training with young Midoriya." Hawks handed a photograph to All Might, and he practically opened his mouth in surprise. "Tamura Shigaraki, the offspring of All for One." Yes. He was last seen during the incident of a newly opened bridge collapsing. Upon analyzing it, there were no structural flaws, why we believe he was the one who damaged the bridge using his quirk. Hawks handed him a second photo. In it was a mysterious man with a mask covering his mouth and nose. We believe their target was this man, the new mob boss, Overhaul, who was driving over the bridge at the time. An affront among criminals. That's what we'd like to know, Hawks said. If the motive for the attack were clearer, it would be easier to try to predict their next move. And that's why I ask you. Hawk's countenance had become unusually serious. When you last fought All for One, was there anything that told you that he was leaving some unfinished business to his successor? No, All Might replied flatly. By the time he definitively defeated All for One, Tamura Shigaraki had already completely severed ties with him. He probably realized that he was just being used and left it without looking back. We destroyed all the nomas that were being vatted and seized all of Dr. Kudaigaraki's research, which was also taken into custody. But I think you already know that. I was afraid you would say that. So we're the same as we were at the beginning, Hawks said, relaxing his countenance a little. And how are you doing with that fight, if it can be known? All Might heaved a big sigh. Now I can only work as a hero 15 minutes a day, so it's become an act of coming and going. Still, you once again surpassed me in endeavor on the charts this year. And while it's not like anyone notices those details, don't you think it's time for your retirement? All Might looked out the window, and Hawks followed him to an empty nest in a tree. Oh yes, I see. You are still in the process of finding a worthy successor to be the new symbol of peace before you can retire. Hawks took a sip from his cup of coffee, trying to hide a smile. All Might stood up with the intention of leaving, having caught a hint of mockery in what Hawks had just asked him. I think I've answered all the questions that pertain to the case. Certainly, Hawks acknowledged with no intention of stopping him. But if you remember anything else, you can call me whenever you want. It would be a great honor, Hawks said, handing him one of his cards, which All Might put in his pocket. A moment after he closed the door of the private room they had rented in the cafeteria, Hawks allowed himself to stretch his legs under the table and, looking up at the ceiling, remembered the boy with green hair and freckles he had seen on the beach with All Might. So he could be the next symbol of peace, she laughed a little. All Might was walking back to the beach, still annoyed by that interaction with Hawks, convinced that he would never end up liking that guy. Excuse me. A voice knocked behind him, and as he turned, he saw a young girl with pink hair and strange eyes. Yes? My name is Mei Hatsume, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Hello, Toshinori wondered, though the name seemed somewhat familiar. The girl continued to watch him with a big smile. Sure, like All Might, this happened to him all the time, but it's his current form people use to avoid him. Then a terrifying thought came to mind. Was she one of those young girls who took men to bars and then made them spend large sums of money? I'm sorry, I must go back to the beach now. Someone is waiting for me. Toshinori tried to continue walking. Don't worry, the young man on the beach is fine. I've been watching him very closely since he left, said Hatsume, managing to capture the man's full attention. Really? Yes. Under the new entry system, they said we had 3 months to turn in a project that would be played according to their qualities. But I went ahead and submitted my project earlier. What's wrong with being enthusiastic and wanting to get investors' attention from the start? Hatsume began to laugh at All Might's astonishment and concern. Of course, I always make it a point to put a satellite locator on each and every one of my babies, he said, showing her a device with a kind of radar. Of course, just to make sure they don't end up in the wrong hands. At the same time, sometimes I place small microphones. And cameras, All Might, almost terrified, said. No, cameras, no. Why don't I need them, she said, pointing to her eye level. As you can see, my quirk allows me to see things at very long distances, so I can monitor each of my babies myself. Babies? Right now I see that Midoriya is still trying to complete the 100 shots that I left him with before he left. Hatsume smiled with a dreamy air. I could use an assistant who is as docile as he is, and who will help me test my inventions. My current assistant is always scolding me about everything, like wondering if I followed all the safety standards or things like that. But young Midoriya is very busy, All Might's tried to justify. What a pity, Hatsume quickly turned. But you know it's funny. Earlier, on this same beach, I saw hero number 1, All Might swimming. I wouldn't mind him giving me his opinion on my babies. Do you think I'll still be here? Do you think Midoriya saw it? It would be better to ask him, wouldn't it? All Might let out a sigh of resignation at this girl's blackmail. Please forgive me, young Midoriya, All Might's mused. It had already gotten a little dark, and Mr. Tashinori had told him by message that he had been delayed by some inconvenience. But he was already on his way. Without realizing it, time had passed. Izuku was now trying to meet the pull-up goal, but so far he had only managed to do 20 in a row. I knew it was just a matter of building muscle memory, so I just had to continue to keep a good pace. You can do it, he recalled, and following an impulse, he kicked the ball into the scrap heap, trying to imitate Hawks. However, as he went for the ball, he was terrified to see a hand sticking out of 2 containers. Ah! He shouted and backed away, before determining that it would be best to see if anyone was hurt. As he separated the containers, he saw a boy with a huge red scar on his left eye, barely conscious and breathing heavily. Hey, are you okay? He tried to move it by the shoulders. Don't worry, I'll call an ambulance immediately. When he took out his cell phone, the boy slapped him to stop him. Don't call anyone and leave. But, what, didn't you hear me? Go. Spikes of ice spiked around him, and it was then that the boy lost consciousness. Deciding not to listen to what the boy had told him, he made space for himself between the ice and with a determined air, arranged him as well as possible to be able to carry him on his back. On a laptop, on a bed full of Cabbage Patch dolls. The scene from a video was repeated over and over again. It was the time when Bakugo was suffocated by the mud monster. The monster was smiling wickedly, and his hostage was seen struggling, tears streaming down his eyes. Katsuki Bakugo, you're so cute, smiled Himiko Toga, quite blushing, returning once again to the video. I want to know more about you. Knock knock, Twice said, sticking his head out the door, wearing only the mask of his disguise. In one movement, Toga closed the laptop and hugged the cushion she was lying on. Twice. You're supposed to knock and wait for the answer before you go in. The man closed the door and knocked. Himiko didn't answer and saw the shadow under the door move back and forth. That made her smile a little. Twice was still pacing back and forth when she saw Toga leave the room. I'm sorry. I heard you talking to yourself, and I thought you might be going crazy, and I just thought you might want company. I'm not going crazy, Toga said, sitting on the couch in the dingy living room. I was just thinking out loud, and you know I don't like it when you spy on me. Yes, I already know, so please don't get mad at me, Twice asked with a tear poking out of her mask. I'm not angry, but excited, Toga said, playing with her feet. That's great. We have to decide what you're going to wear. It's a big deal, Twice said, tossing the clothes out of the drawers. Though if I'm the lucky one, you don't have to wear anything. His comment was greeted with a slap in the face, worthy of a comedic duo. You know I'm grateful for letting me stay at your house, but that's not why I'm going to take my clothes off, Toga said, stepping over the clothes lying on the floor toward the exit door. No, please don't go. I swear I'll change, Twice pleaded at his feet. I'm not leaving. I'll just go out and get what I'll wear the day I declare myself, Toga smiled, blushing. You're right that it's something very important. Opening his eyes, the first thing Todoroki saw was the worried face of the boy from before. Startled, he sat up on the bed, dropping a damp cloth that had been on his forehead. He held his head, still feeling quite dizzy, and so he couldn't help but lie down again. Please don't get up. You still have some fever, Midoriya said, placing the wet cloth back on his forehead. Are we in the hospital? Asked Todoroki, scanning the room with his eyes. No, in my house, Midoriya smiled. So I guess you're kind of a minimalist. Midoriya smiled a little embarrassedly. A lot of things happened, and I got rid of a lot of the decoration. I see, Todoroki said, closing his eyes. Does anyone else know I'm here? No, Midoriya said, standing up and walking toward the door. So try to rest for now. In the absence of an answer, Izuku left the room. But before closing, she could hear him talking again. Don't let anyone know I'm here. Izuku replied with a small nodding sound. Pulling his cell phone out of his pocket, Izuku realized that he had several new messages from Mr. Toshinori. And to his surprise, at that very moment a call was coming in silent mode. On an impulse, he deflected the call, regretting it instantly, not allowing him to rest his nerves. The keys were heard at the front door of the house, and Izuku hurried to catch up with his mother. "Izuku," she said smiling, closing the door behind her. "I'm glad you're here." Then she seemed to remember something, and raised her shopping bag. "We'll have curry rice for dinner today." "That's great, Mom," he said, pretending to smile, but unable to hide his concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he hastened to say before making a decision. "Just invite a friend home." "Really? A friend?" asked his mother, looking everywhere. "Yes. It's just that he didn't feel very well, and he's resting in my room." "Shouldn't we call your parents?" "It's just that they're not in the city, and where they are, they don't have coverage." Izuku was quick to lie. "That seems very suspicious to me, Izuku." He laughed nervously. "But I'm glad you're bringing a friend home. This is the first time." Nervous laughter again. "Just don't ask him too many questions. He's a very low-key guy, and we wouldn't want him to feel uncomfortable." Her mother nodded, heading to the kitchen. "I'll do my best to make the best impression on your friend," his mother said, raising a fist determinedly. "Thank you, Mom." Izuku sighed with some relief, telling himself that lying wasn't for him. Izuku's mother had been fascinated by the boy, who was undoubtedly quite handsome, and judging by the look on his face, she wasn't even remotely thinking that it was all a farce. "And tell me, Todoroki, have you known each other for a long time?" he said, serving him what Izuku thought was a rather generous helping of curry rice. "We met recently," Todoroki said seriously, although after the first spoonful he seemed more encouraged to continue eating. Izuku's mom was still in the clouds as she served her ration to her son. "Mom, I'd like to invite Todoroki to stay overnight," said Midoriya with a determined air. "Of course, you can stay as long as you want." Todoroki lowered the spoon, and his expression became slightly sad. "I don't want to be a nuisance." "You're not," said both mother and son, and they both smiled at each other. For a moment, the memory of his mother holding him and laughing came to Shoto's mind. But was it a real memory? Or just a desire for how you would have liked things to be? Someone knocking on the front door roused him out of his reverie, and he became alert. "Young Midoriya, why don't you answer the phone when they call you?" Toshinori claimed as he entered the dining room. "Ah, completely forgot to call back." I'm sorry, Izuku apologized, very sorry. "It's just that a friend came to visit me at home, and I completely forgot about it." All Might couldn't help but look initially surprised at the sight of Todoroki sitting at the table, and it seemed to him that he noticed it too. "Hello." Midoriya looked at them both and wondered if Mr. Toshinori knew anything about Todoroki. "So what happened?" asked Uraraka as she sat on the train home, her cell phone on her cheek. Izuku used his hands free as he finished cleaning the classroom, since it was his turn to do so. "Well, after dinner, Mr. Toshinori took me and Todoroki outside under the pretext of continuing with the project of cleaning up the beach. It turns out that Todoroki ran away from home and his father had been looking for him." "And how did Mr. Toshinori know that?" "Being friends with the police chief, he can find out about that kind of thing." "And then Todoroki went home." Mr. Toshinori promised to give Todoroki a few days to think about what he wants to do, and that includes applying for his emancipation if he wishes, as long as he's going to stay in my house. Poor Todoroki. His father must have pushed him too hard, if he's considering doing so. "Yes," Midoriya said sadly, leaning back on one of the desks, and thinking for the first time that having a father sounded complicated, too. Could it be that his father had left because he didn't have a quirk? Or for some other reason? "Are you still there?" Uraraka called out to him, still on the line. Oh yes, he said, reacting and remembering something. By the way, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Tashinori. He told me that you could join us tomorrow to meet a girl aspiring to the UA engineering area. He invented gloves and shoes that have helped me a lot for my training. Really? Sounds interesting. So it's a date. See date? Oh, it's my stop. Then I'll see you tomorrow, Uraraka said, suddenly hanging. Date? Izuku repeated alone in the living room. Izuku continued to play with his fingers as he walked down the stairs to the second floor of the school toward the exit. Appointment. Uraraka definitely didn't mean the romantic sense of the word. He had also specified that Mr. Tashinori would accompany them, so it was more than clear that by appointment, he meant that it was a fact that he would see them tomorrow. Although, on the other hand, this would be the first time they would see each other on the weekend. Izuku blushed slightly. Would it be a good idea to bring some extra cash in case Uraraka wanted to go to a coffee shop after going to meet the aspiring engineer? Should you ask your mom what to wear? A lot of ideas tormented his head, when suddenly he almost stumbled on the last step to the lockers and had to take a step back to keep from falling. I like you. Izuku covered his mouth with both hands. Apparently, a girl was confessing to someone in the lockers. I really like Bakugo. Midoriya clasped her two hands in her mouth to avoid making the slightest of noises, but her mind was screaming Kachin. Ah? What are you talking about? In front of Bakugo stood a girl bowing and offering him a letter, her arms outstretched. I've been watching you, and I think you're a very deep guy. I can see it in your eyes. Bakugo saw his reflection in the mirror of his locker and only saw him tired of having to deal with this nonsense. Listen, I'm not the right person for you. The girl made a noise that indicated that she had started crying. You say that because you like someone else? The girl asked in a trembling voice. Seeing his pathetic face in expectation, he imagined his mother giving him a safe. Knowing that this was the answer he was hoping for to justify his rejection. Yes, why not? He said carelessly. I understand. The girl's eyes became even moist, and she ran out of there crying. What the hell is going on with these extras? Bakugo complained, carrying his backpack. Kachin, that wasn't right. You made her cry. Both Bakugo and Izuku looked at each other in surprise for a moment. And the first to react was Bakugo. What the heck? Mind your own business. What didn't they teach you not to listen to other people's conversations? Somehow, his words were greeted by a cheerful expression from Midoriya. Kachin. Ah, why are you smiling? Are you making fun of yourself? Deku shook his head. Since the incident with the mud monster, I had noticed that your attitude had changed a bit, and I came to think that you had become ill or suffered a subsequent trauma, Deku explained, lowering his voice considerably with the following sentence. Although I also came to think that you had stopped messing with me because you had noticed that the gap between the two of you had become wider, and that I am no longer at your level. Bakugo stared at him for a long time with complete seriousness. And Deku was afraid that she was looking at him with pity. Hell, 2 statements in a row. What I was missing. All I want to do is get home to take a shower, he said, slamming the door of his locker and walking straight for the exit. Deku was stunned, with eyes like those of a fried fish, at the thought of proposing to Kachin. Ha 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 ha, laughed Uraraka. And then what did you do? I didn't think it was so funny. Deku was a little embarrassed. I'm sorry. But it's true that there's a certain tension between the two of you that can easily be misinterpreted. Uraraka continued with a laugh. Behind them walked Mr. Tashinori, who saw the tender scene among the young men, thinking that they certainly made a beautiful couple. Suddenly, he noticed 3 details in particular. The young woman's hair, bulging cheeks, and eyes were very similar to those of young Midoriya's mother. Very obvious, he thought. And he had to grit his teeth and cover his mouth a little to keep from laughing. "You too, Mr. Toshinori?" complained Midoriya upon noticing. "No, it's just that I remembered a joke." This time, the three of them laughed a little. "And by the way, what kind of place are you going to, sir?" asked Uraraka at last, finishing laughing. "It's a small machine shop." Uraraka heaved a sigh of relief. "For a moment, I thought I had the wrong outfit, since you two are in suits." Deku and Lord Toshinori looked at each other. "I dress like that a lot of the time," Mr. Toshinori replied without giving it any importance. "Do you usually dress like that too, Deku?" she asked, seeing him from head to toe in a formal red suit and black shirt that contrasted nicely with his green hair and eyes. "Gee, thanks," he said, turning red, the same shade as the suit. "You look great too." Uraraka looked at herself in her denim shorts at the waist and white blouse, and said to herself that her outfit was nothing to write home about. But she smiled at Deku's kindness. It was so cute. As if Deku read his thoughts, he smiled at him in a very warm way, as she had never seen him before. And Uraraka had to blink twice to confirm that it was the same Deku, whom she knew until now mainly by his expressions of being on the verge of crying or embarrassed by something. However, that pretty smile was lost to a sudden explosion that sent Deku flying straight to the ground. "I've had enough of you, Hatsune. I resign," said a black-haired, bespectacled boy coming out of the workshop followed by a smokescreen. As they cleared their heads a little, the first thing Mr. Toshinori and Uraraka saw was a pink-haired girl with her breasts at the level of Midoriya's nose, who was trying hard to look as far away from her breasts as possible and not move an inch. "And why would I need such a whiny helper if I already have the one I love?" she said, looking down at Midoriya, who was still crushed under her breasts. Faced with the bizarre vision of perversion from someone as innocent as Midoriya, neither Uraraka nor Mr. Toshinori knew what to say. "Please forgive me, young Midoriya. This happened because of my oversights," All Mights internally apologized. Once inside the workshop, Izuku was still affected by what had happened. Uraraka seemed to still be processing it, and Mr. Toshinori was clearing his throat. "Well, as you can see, this is where the magic happens," said Hatsune, introducing the entire workshop in one go, which was filled to the ceiling with gadgets and cables. "I'm sorry. You said babies. You mean your Masco or?" asked Uraraka, who suddenly felt his personal space violated with Hatsune behind him. "And what do we have here?" Lord Toshinori saw fit to cover Midoriya's eyes and himself in time, before hearing some groans from Uraraka. Enough. You tickle me, Hatsune." They could both hear and instead turned their backs. "Fit for two gentlemen." "Well," Hatsune concluded, blurting out to Uraraka, "I have an idea of your measurements." "And what's your quirk?" "I can levitate things that—" "It's very difficult to work with gravity." "Pass," he said, dodging her without letting her finish. "Let's move on to the next one." Seeing Hatsune's intentions, Uraraka stood with her whole body between her and Deku, who was still on his back and helpless. "Wait. You're going to make a mess of it," he said and muttered very softly. "In more ways than one." "Well, and what's your quirk, new helper?" Mr. Toshinori nudged Deku slightly. "I don't have a quirk," Deku said, turning around at last and looking very serious. Uraraka noticed this and was about to say something, but was interrupted. "What?" excited Hatsune. "The jackpot." "Ah? Sure. You are a blank sheet of paper on which you can write an infinite number of things. It's a hassle to have to adapt my babies in their developmental stage to a quirk, and then have to modify it for another for presentation." Hatsune took Deku by the hand and began to pull him to the back of the workshop. "Come with me, blank sheet of paper, and I promise I will make you shine brighter than anyone else." It's okay. But I don't know if I got used to the blank page," Deku said as he moved away from the sight of Uraraka and Mr. Toshinori. "I might as well call you a quirk virgin, If that's better for you, Hatsune proposed. That's 1,000 times worse. I think I prefer a blank page. Or my name. Stop chattering on blank pages. You're looking like my old assistant. Sorry. That's the way I like it. Deku turned red as she helped him remove the jacket from his suit. Out of the corner of his eye, All Might could see the young Uraraka, somewhat worried about what was going on between the young Midoriya and Hatsune, and I couldn't help but smile a little. How enviable those feelings of youth. Ah, what a relief. Fresh air at last. Uraraka stretched her arms to the sky, glad to have finally left Hatsune's workshop. I'm sorry if it didn't turn out the way we thought, Mr. Toshinori apologized. I never thought this Hatsune girl was so scary. Both Deku and Uraraka politely denied. At the end of the day, it was fun, Uraraka said, not convinced. Yes, besides she didn't care that I didn't have a quirk, Midoriya said, looking at both hands and smiling a little. I'm glad you think that, young Midoriya, Mr. Toshinori said, gently tapping his shoulder. You are the only one who should be able to choose your path, and don't let anyone limit your possibilities. Not even me. Do you understand? Yes. Uraraka watched them tenderly. They really were like father and son. And what should we do now? She dared to ask. I have some business to take care of, but you should take the opportunity to go for a walk. There's a square near here, Mr. Toshinori said, pointing in the right direction. A strawberry milkshake would definitely suit me. What do you say, Deku? See, sure, Midoriya agreed. Well, then we'll see you later in the evening to continue cleaning up the beach. Mr. Toshinori said goodbye. I'll ask Todoroki if he'd like to join us, Midoriya announced, managing to see the man waving his hand as he continued to walk away. That seemed strangely familiar to Deku. Come on? Asked Uraraka, pulling him by the hand, which of course made him very nervous, but he tried to control himself. Yes. They both visited stalls, clothing stores, saw the sideboards, and even entered a pet store, where by chance they met the heroine Mirko, with whom they took the opportunity to take a selfie with the bunnies, and almost at the end Deku bought a soccer ball. All the time talking about interesting things and enjoying each other's company. Until they arrived at a nice cafe with a view of the main fountain in the square where they decided to enter. So, just like Hatsune, you also want to get into the UA? Asked Deku excitedly. Yes, Uraraka admitted, trying to undo the discomfort she felt when she recognized him rubbing the back of his neck. But in the course of heroes. That's amazing. Yes, but I don't know if I can yet. But what are you talking about? Your quirk would definitely come in handy to be a hero. Even your name could be Uravity. Hey, I like that one. Uraraka acknowledged with an amused gesture, although again his face became somewhat sad. But it has nothing to do with my quirk or my name. Deku waited patiently for Uraraka to continue. While tuition and tuition are relatively affordable for anyone who wants to get into the UA, my family is not going through a good time. This statement deeply impressed Deku, who had always thought that everything was going well in Uraraka's life, since he was smiling all the time. My father has a small construction company, and so far everything has been going well. But recently one of his bridges fell. Deku covered his mouth from the shock. While the police investigated and proved there were no structural flaws, the process took long enough for my father to lose most of his clients. And was anyone hurt? Since the bridge had just opened, I asked my father to take me to see it after school and work. And since it was already too late, only one car passed by at that time. Fortunately, when everything happened, I was able to levitate the car and get it to safety. A clear image came to her mind about what happened. Inside were a man with a funny mask and his little daughter who seemed very scared. It's a good thing no one was hurt, Deku said relieved. They were lucky you were there to save them like I was. Again Deku's cute smile was present, to which Uraraka couldn't help but blush slightly, trying to fan himself with his hand to get out of that state. The point is that my greatest wish was to become a hero, so that one day I could lighten my parents' expenses. But now it would be hypocritical of me not to worry about being a burden to them until I can work professionally. I see. This left Deku thinking deeply. He couldn't help but remember his mother's worried face the day she tried to end his life. Surely he had been the biggest fool and selfish of them all, he thought, pressing his fists into her lap. But I didn't tell you that so you would feel bad for me. Uraraka tried to laugh, a little uncomfortable. No, I don't feel sorry for you. I promise you. Deku hastily clarified. It's just that I thought I should be more like you. The day we met, I didn't think things through. I just thought about myself, and I didn't stop to consider the consequences and what my mom might feel next. Uraraka smiled in response. Well, you know what Hawk says. Sometimes because we want to save the world, we forget those who are closest. Oh, I said the same thing to my mom the other day. Really? And you know, training on the beach with Mr. Toshinori, I had the opportunity to meet him. Really? Despite being only 24 years old, Hawks is hot on the heels of Best Jeanist and Endeavor, he said to the nod of Deku, also admiring his achievements. But it's true that he came in first place last year as the year with the most charming smile. Above all might. They both laughed a little at how ridiculous that sounded, and at an interval Uraraka again stopped to look at Deku's cute smile. But it's not that I like Hawks or anything, Uraraka tried to clarify, waving his arms in front of her to cover himself a bit. You turned red, Uraraka. They both laughed again. Having left the cafeteria, they were now walking in front of the fountain in the square. Uraraka, do you think you can wait here just a moment? I remembered I wanted to buy something. Yes, of course, Uraraka agreed, a little surprised that he didn't ask her to accompany him. Although she told herself that maybe it was a boy thing that she shouldn't know. He watched Deku walk away with his bag from the ball and took the opportunity to sit down at the fountain. When he took out his cell phone, the first thing he looked for was the photo they had taken with Mirko. But strangely, he found himself zooming in on the part where the two of them appeared together. All in all, it was a good photo, he thought, not realizing that his eyes were shining. Hey old man, why are you so upset? Asked Kirishima following Bakugo out of the video game area. Many would kill for your luck, did you know? Damn. That one could already play quietly without being declared to one. I've had enough of the statements. Hey. Unexpectedly, Kirishima bumped into Bakugo, who had stopped suddenly, and saw him staring at a boy in a red suit running in the direction of the shops. I know what will put me in a good mood. Turning a nerd to mush always cheers me up, he said, walking decisively. Hey, don't take it out on someone innocent. Kirishima chased after him again, worried about what might happen. Uraraka saw her reflection in the water of the fountain when suddenly a shadow behind her approached. Expecting it to be Deku, he turned around, but instead discovered a young man in a black sweatshirt and red shoes. Underneath the hat, he saw a pale face with scars, and as he tried to stand up, he threw his cell phone at the drop with the photo he had been looking at. Where has he gone? Asked Bakugo, making fists with both hands. Hey, didn't you get your shot today or what's wrong? Asked Kirishima, pulling him by the arm. Ha! As if that trash could beat me, Bakugo sneered, letting go of his friend's grip. I must admit that the first few days caused me some problems, but now I'm back. You're telling me that you were put on a substance specifically created to lower your testosterone, and yet your body again produced an excess. Kirishima was impressed. Bakugo let out a snort of satisfaction when he suddenly saw Deku running in the opposite direction from the corridor they were in. There you are, she said, coming out after him. Wait, shouted Kirishima following him. Will you make me chase you like this all day? Midoriya stopped almost as soon as he reached the mall's fountain, and had to take a few seconds to analyze what was happening a few meters ahead. Uraraka was still sitting at the fountain where he had asked her to wait for him. But next to her was a man who covered half of his face with the hood of his black sweatshirt. He appeared to be saying something to Uraraka as he handed her his cell phone, which had apparently been dropped. "Deku!" Kachin shouted unexpectedly, pulling him by the collar of his shirt. And although that took him by surprise, Izuku tried not to take his eyes off what was still happening at the fountain. "Leave it alone. He's not to blame for your excess masculinity," asked Kirishima. "You want to shut up," Kachin shouted very close to his ear. But Izuku didn't turn around. The suspicious man had begun scratching his neck insistently, and his attitude seemed more and more strange to him. "Yesterday you said that you thought I had stopped hitting you because you thought that the gap between the two of us had widened and that you are no longer at my level. But today you are in luck," he said, pulling him up, taking advantage of their height difference. "I'll let you prove yourself. You and I here, no quirks." "It's not a good time, Kachin," replied Deku, gritting her teeth, wanting to go as soon as possible to Uraraka, who seemed to be starting to look quite uncomfortable with the man. "Ha, see? You're just a big coward," Bakugo said, raising his fist in preparation to punch him. The limit of Deku's patience came when the strange man ran his hand over Uraraka's shoulder and placed 4 fingers on his neck. Deku gritted his teeth very tightly, and as he dropped his shopping bag, the soccer ball rolled out. "I won't let you use me like you punching bag Kachin anymore. Never again," he said with a flying kick straight to Bakugo's side, managing to free himself and knocking him to the ground, trying to get back on his feet as quickly as possible. The first thing Deku saw was the soccer ball. "Hey you! Get your dirty hands off him." Shigaraki had only a second to see a ball coming very hard towards his face and removing his hand from the young woman's neck. He put his 5 fingers in front of him. Uraraka watched in utter terror as the ball disintegrated, as if it had been made of dust all along. And he was even more terrified by the fact that a moment earlier those fingers had been on his neck. What neither of them expected was that Deku would run after the ball and grab Uraraka by the waist to take her out of the stranger's reach. A distraction, Shigaraki understood, standing up and hiding his hands in his trouser pockets. "What the hell was that?" asked Kirishima from a distance. "Police." On the ground, Bakugo still held his side. Kirishima's little distraction was enough to make the stranger back away and start losing in the mall crowd. Midoriya and Uraraka left the police headquarters after dark. They were followed by Bakugo and Kirishima, and upon meeting them the blonde glared angrily at Deku. "Kachin, sorry for the above. It's just that I..." "Don't apologize. Why, I'll give it back to you for 1,000. Is that clear?" "We'll see." Deku accepted the challenge. "Stop smiling. You make me sick." I'm sorry. I know you've been asked this many times, but are you okay?" Kirishima asked Uraraka as he walked past her. She nodded. "Yes. If it wasn't for Deku, maybe I wouldn't be here anymore." "It's true. That shot was amazing. You can tell you've been practicing. One day we should get together to play together," proposed Kirishima, to which Deku replied with a nod and a smile. "The kick you gave Bakugo was also very good," he said, placing his hand on the shoulder of the blonde, who immediately shook him. "I met this ruffian in an induction course to be heroes. Best Jeanist himself asked me to lead him on the right path, and that's what he tried." "You talk too much," Bakugo growled, starting to walk in the direction of the station. "Oh, by the way, I'm sorry your date was messed up like this in the end. But hey, I'll see you later." Kirishima said goodbye, filling in behind Bakugo. Both Deku and Uraraka stared at the ground in embarrassment. "It's true," Deku encouraged, taking a box out of the bag in his hand. "With everything that happened, I almost forgot to give you this. I hope you like it." "Oh, and why?" "Oh, I feel bad. I didn't buy you anything," Uraraka said somewhat embarrassedly, hurrying to take the gift, and Deku shook his head. I wanted to thank you properly for saving me the day we met. For a while, I didn't have the strength to do things right. But I want to change from now on, he said with a bow. Thank you very much, Uraraka. She smiled happily and raised her fist in front of him. Today you saved me, so there's nothing to be thankful for. But we have to promise that we will continue to take care of each other. Deku smiled, slightly blushing, and answered Uraraka's fist, just as their parents were leaving the police department, who looked at them tenderly. What do you say, young Midoriya? That they met Tamura Shigaraki? Mr. Toshinori startled in the darkness of the beach. Deku stopped pulling at the huge piece of scrap metal for a moment and wiped the sweat with his forearm. Have you heard of him? Before he could answer, Todoroki crossed between them carrying a huge crate. He was a close collaborator of All for One. I heard Dad talk about him on several occasions, and he seems to have a fearsome power. Yes, Midoriya said, remembering how he had disintegrated the ball in front of them. It's a terrible quirk. It makes me think that it's better to have been born without any singularity than to have to be careful about touching things and destroying them. Unaware of it, Todoroki looked down at one of his hands. And what did he want to accomplish by attacking the young woman? Asked Mr. Toshinori. Midoriya continued to pull the scrap metal with the ropes as she continued the conversation. Perhaps as a way to get rid of the stress of remembering the fact that Uraraka had been in danger because of him. Shigaraki confessed to him that he was to blame for destroying the bridge that had been built by his father's company, and that he was upset that Uraraka would have stood in his way, saving that car. And he told you he intended to attack the car. He didn't tell her. But he did tell her something very strange before. Izuku recalled when she saw him handing his cell phone to Uraraka. He probably thought that he wouldn't survive their encounter, and so he told her that a long time ago. He also had people he really cared about, and that remembering that caused him great discomfort. Mr. Toshinori remained brooding for a long time. Could he be referring to his family? As far as his research had taken him, he had discovered that he was his teacher's grandson. But until now, Shigaraki had never shown any interest in rethinking his origins. Or could it be that now that he didn't have the influence of All for One, something had changed? I'm sorry to interrupt your thoughts, Todoroki apologized in front of him. But I'd like to know how it went with my father. He's definitely not happy at all, he said, showing his burnt tie and discarding it with the scrap metal. Especially when I told him I wouldn't tell him where you were. But in the end, he was able to understand that he hasn't been doing things right. Then he took out an envelope and held it out to Todoroki. He asked me to give you this. Todoroki looked away. I don't want to listen to their excuses. This is from your mother. Himeko Toga was hopping down the dark street when she passed a gadget store when she saw something on one of the lit screens that caught her eye. He pressed his face to the sideboard, smiling broadly. Ochako. On the news, Ochako had a dismayed face, and next to him was a boy dressed in red who seemed to be telling the press something. At one point, they both looked at each other and smiled. What? Toga seemed to get more excited. But that boy looks a lot like my first high school love. It's not like I care. Now I already have a new one. But in the end, we seem to have similar tastes. Himeko turned her back to the TV and clasped her hands excitedly. Maybe now you can understand how I felt back then, Ochako. Wah, it's a pink shirt. An excited Uraraka took the gift Deku had given her out of the box. Without waiting another minute, she tried it on in front of the mirror, also checking how she looked behind it, and felt an aura of happiness invade her. It's very cute, just like Deku. When she realized what she had said without thinking, and even though she was alone in her room, she began to feel ashamed that she had said it out loud. He hung up his new shirt carefully, quickly turned off the light, and lay back covering his face with the sheets. I'd better go to sleep. It's been a long day, and I don't think clearly anymore, she tried to convince herself. Deku sneezed, lying on the extra futon in his room. Did you catch a cold? Asked Todoroki from the bed, and Deku shook his head. Excuse me. If you don't mind me asking, have you thought about what you will do about your father? Asked Midoriya. I haven't made a final decision yet, Todoroki began, and looked up at the dark ceiling of the room. The root of it all is that my father wanted at all costs to create a successor who could surpass All Might. That's why he married my mother, hoping that the combination of quirks would make the user extremely powerful. 2 quirks, Midoriya repeated, pondering how cool that sounded. Todoroki's face twitched with some suppressed anger. By any measure, it is immoral to have taken advantage of her status to arrange a marriage arranged for those purposes. That's why I don't want to become my father's puppet using his quirk, Todoroki said. And what does your mother think about this? My mother was committed to a mental sanatorium when I was still little. Todoroki touched the scar on his face. This was done to me by my mother, throwing boiling water on me for having a look too similar to my father's. Midoriya looked at him quite shocked. My mother's mental state has deteriorated since the death of my older brother, Toya, who was incinerated by the fire he created, trying to gain my father's recognition. Deku tried to think what he could say, but it was too much information. It was overwhelming. In the absence of a reply from Midoriya, who seemed to have been left speechless by her family history, Todoroki sighed and decided to continue. That's why if I could get rid of my father's firepower, I would do it without thinking about it. That's what All for One did. Deku finally spoke very seriously. I promised people who wanted to get rid of their quirks that I would free them from them. And in turn I promised those who were born without quirks like me that I would endow them with a uniqueness. That's why it gained so many followers in a short time. However, he started hoarding the best quirks for himself and became extremely powerful, Todoroki continued, frowning. Mr. Toshinori told me that Tamura Shigaraki, the person who attacked Uraraka today, had a father-son relationship with All for One. But when he realized that he wanted to use it, Shigaraki abandoned him. That was the first time Izuku had made that statement, which, while she had no proof, she assumed was the most likely. Well, at least you get along with your mom, Todoroki said. In the letter my mom sent me, she says she wants me to visit her, and I'm considering going tomorrow. Then do your best. You'll see that everything will be fine, Midoriya encouraged him. Todoroki nodded with a faint smile. It was a new day. The cherry blossom trees had begun to bloom, and Uraraka waited patiently under one of them after high school. He covered himself with one hand from a ray of sunlight that came from among the branches. Uraraka. He was glad to see Deku coming in on a short run up the hill, and then holding on to his knees to recover. I'm sorry I kept you waiting. Kachin tried to fight me again, but I managed to evade him. Uraraka shook his head, defying the delay, and watched intently as Deku caught his breath. His cheeks flushed from running. It seemed to Uraraka that the sun was getting stronger and stronger, and Deku seemed to notice his discomfort. We should buy some ice cream at the stall over there, Deku said. It was curious, but just now I would have sworn that there was no stall in that place. Deku went a little ahead to buy them and seemed to talk to someone inside the stand. But to his surprise, Deku returned without the ice cream. They say the ice cream machine broke down, Deku announced, disappointed. That tends to happen a lot. I even think it's become an internet joke. She tried to cheer him up. Oh, I know, Deku seemed to recall. I know it would be better than ice cream in this heat, he said with a pretty smile. Uraraka was shocked to see Deku take one of his hands and radically change his expression to one that was more focused and perhaps provocatively, she brought her wrist close to her mouth. You, Uraraka, he said, kissing the inside of her wrist and then running his tongue around. Trembling and startled, Uraraka rolled over on the bed. He took a heavy breath, his face flushed and his cheeks covered. What kind of dream had that been? It was 4 a.m. and All Might couldn't sleep anymore. This whole Shigaraki thing was bothering him, mainly because he kept thinking that All for One, though dead, had something to do with it. That occasion, 4 years ago, had been a small operation to ensure secrecy, and therefore very little had been leaked to the media. They had been with him. Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Eraserhead, and of course, Rookie of the Year Hawks, who, due to his young age, had managed to pass himself off as a prospect of an all-for-one fan, and in his role as a double agent had discovered his base of operations. When they arrived and analyzed the records, they discovered that these monsters, in the preliminary stage, had been people at one time. Even now he was furious at the thought that All for One had used his own followers to try to start a revolution in which he would benefit the most. He had preyed on people's deepest longings, and that could not be forgiven. So when the time came, he couldn't help but use his power to 100%, resulting in the death of All for One, and he had been severely injured during the battle. A news notification on his cell phone took him out of his memories, followed by a text message, which despite the time made him finish getting up. "Are you sure you don't want us to accompany you?" asked Midoriya in front of the entrance to her home building. Todoroki shook his head gently. "I think it's something I should do on my own." "Okay, drop me a line if you need anything. My mom and I will go for a bit of a run since Mr. Toshinori had some business to attend to. But I'll keep my cell phone on at all times." Midoriya's mom was already warming up from behind. "I never thanked you for what you have done for me, Midoriya," Todoroki said seriously. "But since I don't want to look as cold as my father, I'll tell you that. I feel like you're the first friend I've ever had." Midoriya's mom was teary-eyed, holding back tears. Todoroki scratched his chin a little. "I must go." "I'll see you after school," said Midoriya goodbye with a smile. Uraraka patted his cheeks to try to wake up. After all, she hadn't been able to go back to sleep, and was still affected by that dream she had. "I just hoped that the train wouldn't take too long, and that I could get some sleep at school before class." Uraraka, Deku was running toward her on the platform. "Ah, Deku," said Araka. "I didn't know I was taking this train line," he said, pinching his cheek to make sure it wasn't another dream. "Normally not. But I went for a run with my mom, and it was a little early. So I decided to change paths and train a little in the school gym before class." At that moment the train arrived, and they were unexpectedly pushed in together to the other window of the car. "It seems like rush hour for office workers," Uraraka said, trying to lessen the awkwardness of being so close. "Yes," he confirmed, trying to turn his head away from her, but thinking, "I can smell your shampoo, and it smells great. Ah, you see. They say he will be the new symbol of peace when All Might retires." The voice of two young women talking, who were sitting in the front, caught their attention. "Her name is Mirio Tagada, and she is in the second year of the Career of Heroes at the UA, said one of them, showing a photo to the other. "He's very handsome. Maybe if I was 15 years younger." "You sounded like a pervert." Both women laughed. Looking at Deku, Uraraka couldn't help but notice his blank stare. He had already noticed that sometimes when they mentioned All Might that happened, and that's why he decided to call him by touching his arm, but hard, he whispered as he squeezed the muscle in his arm. "Ah, down here," she said, utterly embarrassed, making her way through the crowd. "But this isn't your station," worried Deku. Having gone out, Uraraka fanned his face with his hand. As the train continued on its way, he wondered inwardly what was happening to him. Arriving in the corridor of his mother's room at the clinic, Todoroki was not too surprised to see his father, dressed in civilian clothes, waiting by the still closed door. He reflexively frowned. "I didn't come to see you," he announced when he arrived at the door. "I know, but I want to talk Shoto," he said, stopping his hand from turning the doorknob. "Of what? How do you continue with your training plan so that it fulfills what you couldn't?" His father gave him a document and he decided to review it. To his surprise, he had a photo of a condo in Deeds. "If you want to go live with your mother, I won't object. There they can live away from me if they wish." The man looked away. "Your brother is leaving for college soon, and your sister is about to get married. I wouldn't want to force you to live alone with me." Shoto looked at the scriptures again and was shocked. Though unable to forget his rage entirely, he looked with renewed fury at his father. "This doesn't even remedy half of what you've done," he said, making a fist of the paper. "And I certainly haven't heard you apologize." "Shoto. Not me, to my mother." To their surprise, the door to the room opened, and a nurse wearing a mask carried Mrs. Todoroki in a wheelchair, apparently unconscious. "Do you please be more considerate of the patients?" the nurse complained. "Mom," Todoroki tried to call her, leaning over his chair. "She's just sedated," the nurse said. A few moments before they arrived, she was overwhelmed that her son was coming to see her, and that's why we had to do it. Now I think it was for the best." The nurse passed between them carrying the chair, and Todoroki had the impression that he looked particularly at his father. "I don't know. Worry. Maybe when they get their business sorted out, they can visit her again," he said, probably smiling under his mask and on his way. Suddenly, Todoroki felt like everything was going in slow motion. Her mother was slowly moving away, but she could still see her white hair. You could hear the footsteps of the nurse who was about to turn down the hall. It wasn't right. But I didn't know what. "Shoo. Wait," she yelled, running to catch up with the nurse with her mother. But when she turned in the hallway, they were gone. Izuku was happy to see his phone. The message Uraraka had just sent her said that she had forgotten that she was going to see a friend, and that was why she had gotten off the train early. For a moment he had thought that he still smelled of sweat from his morning jog and had wanted to avoid it. He kept walking toward the school. A new news notification popped up, and he decided to open it. However, upon reading the headline, he couldn't help but change the expression on his face. Lyzarien, the future symbol of peace. That was the article the women on the train were talking about earlier. Izuku continued reading as he walked. In short, the agency where Tagata did his internship spoke of the countless achievements that the UA student had achieved, even surpassing heroes who were already professionals. His quirk was traversing, which he used in combination with a very well-worked physical strength, and his goal was to rescue 1,000,000 people. Seeing a photo of him, Izuku couldn't help but agree that in many ways he reminded him of All Might. Arriving at the entrance of the institute, Izuku continued walking with a blank stare until he heard the sound of something crashing against the bars of the courts. When he got there, he was surprised to see Kachin practically smashing a ball with a kick. He looked annoyed in a way that Izuku recognized very well. Why he was feeling the same. Noticing Deku's presence watching him, Kachin looked away for a moment. "What the hell are you looking at, idiot?" Without thinking, Midoriya lowered her backpack to catch up with him on the court. "No one invited you, so disappear." Turning a deaf ear, Deku kicked the ball as hard as he could towards the bars, and really felt a little better. Was he deaf? Did you read the article also, Kachin? Bakugo received the ball that was returning for the rebound effect and kicked it again quite hard. That moronic face doesn't even come close to All Might's heels. To Bakugo's surprise, the foolish Deku didn't try to defend him and turned his head off to kick the ball again. Do you think All Might will really choose him as his successor? If he does, I'll kill him, he shouted, kicking the ball even harder. Deku smiled slightly. I was surprised that you agreed to see me. Well, you weren't very subtle in your intentions, All Might replied, showing him the headline on his cell phone screen with a frown, to which Murai Sasaki, also known as Nightai, only referred to adjusting his glasses. You didn't leave me many options. You've been ignoring my requests for me to introduce you to Lyzarien. I'll meet him when I teach at UA next semester. There's no need to rush. I think so. Vera's Mirio developed his quirk that emerged as a flaw and turned it into his power. His physical strength is totally natural, based on hard work, and there is no denying that he has a natural charisma that inspires just by looking at him. It could certainly become a great symbol of peace, All Might mused. Did you know? But perhaps he has already achieved too much on his own, interrupted All Might to the uneasiness of his old companion. It is undeniable that the young Tagada has trained himself, and it is more than admirable. He extended his hand in front of him. But my power, the one for all, is a power that must be cultivated and then passed like a torch. With the young Tagada, I feel that with my power, rather than passing a torch, it would be like stoking a fire that is already there. A kind of power-up, if you want to look at it that way. Murai Sasaki didn't say anything, and it was indecipherable that he was thinking behind those glasses. I'm not saying I've already ruled him out, but my first impression is that he doesn't need to be my successor, since he's already a hero in his own right. This time Sasaki's glasses flashed. That was very well rehearsed, All Might, but you don't fool me. All Might frowned. The only reason you'd discard the most logical and sensible option to pass the one for all is because you're expecting something or someone specific. So you're going to tell me what or who it is. Without planning it, the memory of Hawks, asking him almost the same thing, came to his mind. Yes. I've always thought that when I meet the one who should be the successor of the one for all, I'll be the first to know, he said, standing up. Like the feeling of running when someone is in danger, and you feel your feet move without thinking. To All Might's surprise, his old companion smiled. I've always appreciated your sense of humor. I'm very serious. Totally silly and sentimental. What you tell me is very worthy of you. But well, in the end, it's your decision. Just promise me you'll watch Mirio when you get the chance. All Might nodded. Okay, I'll consider it. On leaving the school, Izuku saw another message from Uraraka, telling him that he would start taking martial arts classes after school. It was a free course aimed at women, to teach them principles of self-defense. And so they would no longer be able to walk to the station together from now on. At first that discouraged her a little, since she would no longer be able to see herself every day. Although on second thought she knew it was very good that she could defend herself if necessary. On the other hand, he didn't feel like talking that day either, he said to himself, holding the sleeves of his backpack tightly. Now he was ready to admit that he was upset by that article that claimed Tagada would be the successor to All Might. While there was no mention of the no one hero's opinion, mere supposition made him feel jealous because of their position. I didn't want to think about what it would be like when I had a girlfriend. If that ever happened. Suddenly, he remembered what he had to do to get all the frustration out of him, and he started running in the direction of the beach. When she arrived at the place where she would debut martial arts, Uraraka couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Although when she saw that one of the girls who were already sitting waiting for the lesson greeted her waving her hand, she told herself that everything would be fine with a smile. Hello, he greeted her, sitting next to her. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Hi, you can call me Kami. It sounds like you're new to this, but don't feel nervous. Thank you. I'll give it a try. Have you taken classes before? A few. It's just that the streets are no longer safe. Tell me. Recently, a stranger grabbed my neck and tried to use his quirk on me. What a horror, the girl said, though it seemed to Uraraka that she didn't really look really scared. Looking at her closely, she was a blonde girl with fair hair and a pretty figure. So Ochako thought that she must have suffered constant harassment because she was pretty, and so it didn't seem too strange to her anymore to be attacked. Another girl with long green hair was watching them both with her big round eyes on the other side. And it wasn't hard for Uraraka to imagine that her quirk would be related to the frogs. So she smiled a little, but she just looked down. Maybe she was kind of shy like Deku. To Midoriya's surprise, Todoroki was already on the beach, moving the scrap metal when he got there. She was a second away from calling him, when she noticed that his expression detonated quite a bit of anger and frustration. Surely something hadn't gone right in the visit to his mother. Now he felt a little guilty for assuring her that everything would be all right yesterday. Why didn't anything turn out as planned? He said to himself, clenching his fists and ready to get to work. Todoroki didn't seem to notice his presence, as he began to move the heaviest scrap metal, and the two continued to work non-stop. All might, walking in the direction of the beach and true to his word. He reviewed the articles related to the young Tagata, becoming more and more impressed. Could it be that he was wrong to wait for the successor of One for All to reveal itself to him? Would Murai be right that she was being overly sentimental about it? His coughs of blood had become more frequent, and perhaps his time was running out. He had to take responsibility for his power and pass the torch before it was too late. Just as her teacher had told her a long time ago. Touching his side, he remembered how his respiratory system had been damaged, and looking up at the beach, he coincidentally gasped as he saw that all the scrap metal was gone. He dropped his cell phone and watched on two gigantic piles, the young Midoriya and the young Todoroki screaming at the top of their lungs, shedding tears. Impossible. The work, which would normally take 3 months, had been accomplished in one. Kami sniffed a little with her nose in the wind and cracked a small smile. "And tell me, Ochako, do you have a boyfriend?" asked her new friend suddenly. "No, I don't think I'm ready for that yet," Uraraka said. "But if there's someone you like, right?" Unwillingly, Uraraka remembered a bit of her dream with Deku and blushed like a tomato. Ah, well. To Uraraka's relief, her friend kept talking. "I do like someone. You're very nice and pretty, so I'm sure she'll reciprocate." "Do you believe," he said, taking her hands suddenly, to which Uraraka nodded. "And you think you could lend me something to use when I come out?" A little puzzled by the question, Uraraka nodded. "Yes, but I don't know if we're the same size." "I think you have a lot more curves than I do," she admitted, somewhat embarrassed. "That doesn't matter," Kami replied, smiling and continuing the walk, just as a lucky charm. Not really understanding what he meant, he followed her to the entrance of the train station. Deku awoke to the sound of the waves at his feet. He abruptly sat up on the sand, and beside him he saw Todoroki and Mr. Toshinori in the darkness of the night, apparently waiting for him to wake up. "You did a great job, young Midoriya. You have far exceeded my expectations," Mr. Toshinori congratulated him. Izuku lowered his head with a faint smile. The last thing he remembered was screaming over a pile of scrap metal. After that, he had surely lost consciousness from excessive tiredness. "Thanks. But I wouldn't have done it so quickly without Todoroki's help." Looking at his friend, he had his eyes in the direction of the sea. "While we were on par with this today, I think overall the credit belongs to you, Midoriya." Izuku remained silent and didn't believe it at all, but he appreciated his friend's kindness. "Also, what I did was an act of venting, rather than a desire to strengthen myself as a person." "In that case, I'm the same," Midoriya admitted. "I did what happened today because of the pent-up frustration I had gathered all this time, given that things haven't turned out as I had hoped." Izuku was suppressing the desire to cry as much as possible, starting with not having developed a quirk, and more recently having to abandon my dream of following in the footsteps of All Might. Mr. Toshinori clenched his fists tightly as Midoriya continued. "I know that compared to your family problems, it's capricious to think like this." "It's not," Todoroki stopped him. "If it's your dream, it's just as important." Unable to contain himself any longer, Izuku began to burst into tears. "No. It's not okay for me to keep crying all the time. I promise to be stronger so that no one has to worry about me." She began to wipe her eyes until she felt Mr. Toshinori's embrace. "Even if we don't want to admit it, we're all sentimental about something." Then he looked at Todoroki. And it's okay to cry. Even heroes do it when they need to. Thank you, I'll remember, Todoroki said, standing up decisively. But first I'll make the one who kidnapped my mother cry. Analyzing that, Deku quickly stood up. Then I'll help you. Uraraka and her new friend were just getting off the train, when by coincidence Bakugo was coming in carrying a gym bag and seemed in a very bad mood. Uraraka was so relieved that he hadn't seen her to call her round face, when suddenly Kami. Hey handsome, don't ruin your beautiful face with that frown. Uraraka was greatly frightened by a possible explosive reaction from Bakugo. But the door closed behind him, and the train began to move forward. For a split second, however, it seemed to Uraraka that a smile had formed on Bakugo's profile face. What was it about the boys' smiles that made them so charming? Uraraka wondered as she remembered Deku smiling. Deku before arriving with Hatsune. Deku laughing in the cafeteria. And then, unexpectedly, Deku falling off the building. But, suddenly, that Deku wasn't him, but Himiko Toga's first love. And he didn't fall from any building, but from the roof of the school. She would run and raise her hand to try to touch him before he hit the ground. I'd rather try to do something than do nothing and regret it later. But Uraraka looked away from what had happened. But as he did, so he found the same boy who had just jumped beside him, his mouth open and unable to believe that he had witnessed his own death. Uraraka woke up rubbing his eyes and couldn't help but feel sad. Toga. Although it was still early, Uraraka decided to go for a run to clear her mind. She was following Deku's lead, and that simple fact made her feel happy and motivated. The sunlight was beginning to emerge when he reached the beach and saw in the distance Deku practicing with Mr. Toshinori and a boy who must be Todoroki, of whom he had told him. Not wanting to interrupt, she stood leaning against the railing, watching them practice fighting styles. And it seemed to her that at times Deku shone with the green hues of his eyes and hair in front of the dawn. His expression as he attacked became unusually fierce and persevering. Again, he felt himself in the clouds, like he's floating with his quirk. Despite the short time they knew each other, he felt that he had already seen him in several facets, and seeing him in this new one, he told himself that he also liked Deku in attack mode too much. That expression of determination made him look totally cool. Without worrying much about whether she was blushing, she asked herself, was this what the girls in the magazines called attraction? Observing that Deku was getting stronger and stronger. Maybe when she met him, she was too distracted by the resemblance she bore to the boy who had obsessed Himiko Toga to notice anything else. But now she felt like she saw Deku at 100%. What did I feel was admiration. Seeing him grow as a person every day and wanting to be just like him. Or honey. For having seen him at his worst, and now seeing him smile again. Or putting it all together, what I really felt was love. And what if I talked about this with Deku? The very thought made her feel anxious. And as she breathed, she felt that her breath was warm. But would it be the right thing to talk to him about his feelings? Now Deku seemed very focused on finding a new path, having given up on following in the footsteps of All Might. And I didn't want that to be lost. His ability to focus either as a fanboy who jotted down everything related to heroes in his notebooks, or as someone who practiced non-stop in all his spare time. He didn't want Deku to change at all. Breaking away from the railing, Uraraka decided to keep running in the opposite direction. From the beach, Deku turned in that direction out of a sort of foreboding, but found no one, and his distraction earned him a blow to Todoroki's face. Don't be distracted, young Midoriya, Mr. Toshinori reprimanded him. Yes. Izuku was walking down a busy street, making notes in one of his notebooks, when he suddenly recognized someone ahead among the people and was overjoyed. Uraraka, wait! Deku shouted when he saw her in a martial arts outfit, and her hair tied back with a clip. Deku! She turned when she saw him reach her. What a surprise to see you. I've just trained with Todoroki and Mr. Toshinori. I'm also coming from training. They both shared a smile and kept walking. Deku was struck by the fact that the collar of Uraraka's martial arts suit left the back of his neck a little exposed. Somehow it looked. She seemed to notice his gaze and turned to look at him. It's a shame we don't see each other so often anymore, Deku said somewhat nervously. I think it's been a month since we last saw each other. Yes, she admitted, lowering her gaze. It's a shame. Is it okay if he ever called you? He asked, playing with his fingers. Though if you're really busy, I'd understand. Uraraka stopped walking and Deku became worried. Sorry if I said anything wrong. It's not like I want to treat you like my girlfriend or something. It's not that I have any intentions with you either, stuttered, turning redder and redder. I know you're just my friend. Then step aside. Loser, Kachin said, pushing him to the ground. Where did it come from? Bakugo? Then does this mean? Asked Uraraka. Yes, he said, taking her cheek. Turn down all those extras for you, round face. Wait, Kachin, shouted Midoriya. But suddenly he saw himself scrawny, skinny, and in his school uniform. Like when Kachin had suggested that she throw herself off the roof. Anything to say? Asked Kachin, intimidating him with his quirk and observing that his own legs were shaking. Kachin's face was getting closer and closer to Uraraka's, but they were interrupted by, everything is fine now. And why? 'Cause I'm here. All Might, what are you doing here? Exclaimed Kachin and Uraraka at the same time, holding hands. Izuku watched him pass by without even noticing. Your death threat touched my heart, young Bakugo. That's why I've decided to make you my successor. I didn't expect anything less, ha 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 ha. Bakugo's evil laughter stretched to infinity and Deku felt himself falling into a dark spiral. Then he felt that someone was shaking him. Midoriya, I think you have a nightmare. The first thing he saw when he woke up was Todoroki. On the street on their way to their morning workout, Todoroki and Midoriya walked around carrying a pair of paddles. I'm sorry if I woke you up with my nightmare, Midoriya apologized, rubbing her eyes. And thank you for waking me up. You always mumble a little bit in your sleep. But today you looked a little disturbed, Todoroki explained. Heavens. I always murmur in my dreams. I didn't know that. I hope I didn't say anything embarrassing. You just kept repeating a name over and over again. What a name. Kachin. Midoriya became discouraged. Don't worry. Anyway, I haven't been able to sleep much since then. In response to his words, Deku recalled that since the kidnapping of Todoroki's mother, no one had reached out to request any kind of ransom or to indicate their intentions. The investigation didn't seem to be going much so far either, given that Endeavor, in all his hero years, had amassed too many enemies to be suspicious of. Todoroki looked very calm, but Deku had a good idea of how he really felt. It had been a month since the beach had been cleaned, and in this time Mr. Toshinori had introduced him to a man who had been a professional hero, known as the Great Torino, who helped him to follow a training that at first seemed too extreme. I had gone with them to a rocky area to learn how to climb and make big Parker-like jumps on the weekends. With a Hatsu modification to her shoes and knee pads, she was able to build up energy if she repeated push-ups and was able to jump higher than she ever imagined possible. Over here, I call them Mr. Toshinori. This is. Midoriya was surprised to recognize the traces of the construction. That's right. It's the bridge that was attacked by Tamura Shigaraki. And we're here to investigate. Todoroki tried to guess, raising his shovel. All the information that could be obtained from this place has already been documented, replied Mr. Toshinori, looking at the large destroyed space of the bridge. As I said at the time to young Midoriya, there are jobs that are not as glamorous as heroes saving people, but community service is necessary for the well-being of society. Even a small bridge can make a big difference in the daily life of a population. just like the beach they were in charge of cleaning. He's quoting what All Might said a few days ago in an interview, Todoroki said. Caught up in his words, he tried to dissemble. Did he really say it? It must be that we feel the same way about it. I didn't know either. Since I unfollowed All Might, I haven't received their notifications, Midoriya reflected. Mr. Toshinori cleared his throat. Anyway, I made a small call for young people from the community to come and help rebuild the bridge. Since the construction company is going through a bad time and is slowly recovering customers. But this bridge was unfairly left as a stain on its reputation. So this means, Midoriya began, but was interrupted. Hello, good morning, Kirishima greeted as he arrived. Next to him came a girl with pink tees and extravagant eyes. I hope we're not late. Hello. Is this where they asked for help? Asked a girl with big eyes and green hair, next to a blonde boy with a big tail. A few footsteps behind him alerted Midoriya and Todoroki. Thank you all so much for coming. He's Uraraka's father. Deku recognized him from when they met at the police station. Izuku Midoriya. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough for saving my daughter, she said, placing a hand on her shoulder. I think I'll always be indebted to you. No, that's not. We agree that Deku is great, Uraraka said, coming out behind the frog-like girl and the boy with the tail. I'm sorry, you're right, daughter. Midoriya was glad to see her come to his side. This time she had tied her hair in a half ponytail, which suited her very well. Deku tried to smile normally, and she responded in kind. As I said, I thank you all for coming. The foreman will be telling them what they can help with at all times. I understand that some are practicing to get into the UA Heroes course like my daughter. So feel free to use your quirks if you consider it good practice. Just be careful not to hurt anyone in the process. Let's go, shouted Uraraka. Yes. Everyone clapped their hands and started moving. Midoriya did her best to keep up as the sacks of cement were passed to her alongside Todoroki. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see what the quirks of each of the workers and volunteers were, and also how they used them in construction. I wanted to have a moment to write it all down in a notebook. Oh, could you wait a moment, said one of the workers. I think we're missing some lumps, and I have to call the supplier to confirm it's not a mistake. Both attended. Deku took advantage of the short break to wipe the sweat from his forehead, and instinctively looked for Uraraka. Surely he was doing something amazing with his zero gravity. Is she catching? Todoroki asked, pointing to her. As she turned, Midoriya saw that she was talking to the blonde boy with a tail, and they seemed to be laughing about something she had said that she couldn't hear. Todoroki could see that Midoriya was frowning slightly. I don't like to meddle in other people's business, but maybe if you talk to her you can sleep better, Todoroki suggested. Midoriya nodded, but just as he was about to take the first step. Done. The missing packages will arrive tomorrow, the worker announced, resuming work. Thank you all very much. See you tomorrow if you're not too tired, said one of the foremen when it was time for the students to go to school. Thank you very much for having us, Kirishima replied on behalf of those who were leaving. Midoriya looked back, expecting to see Uraraka delayed, since she was not with them. But maybe he'd stayed a while longer with his father. Hello, Midoriya. Kirishima pulled him out of his thoughts next to him. You know, I invited Bakugo to come over, but he said he preferred to go to the gym like normal people. I would have sworn this would be the kind of activity he would like. You know, the smell of masculinity is in the air. I don't think you're being very fair to us, reproached the young woman in pink tees on the other side. I'm sorry. It wasn't intentional, Kirishima said. I'm Izuku Midoriya, my pleasure. Being the time of the introductions, I am Tsuyu Isui. But if you want you can call me Tsu. A taste Tsu. By the way, I liked how you used your quirk today, Kirishima commented. It's easy when you can stick to surfaces. I am Ojiro Mashiri, and she is Toru Hagakure. Nice to meet you. They all blinked twice, looking in the direction Ojiro had pointed. Unable to resist, Ojiro stopped, holding back a small laugh, and curiously a second female laugh could be heard. I'm sorry. It's a joke we like to make when we meet new people. For a moment no one understood. Ah, Hagakure is invisible, deduced Midoriya before everyone else. Ojiro nodded, laughing again. A while ago, we made Uraraka believe that his power was getting out of control, and that he was levitating a bucket that he hadn't even touched. Midoriya remembered when he had looked in her direction, and finally understood. He smiled a little, but he was surprised to feel so relieved that the two of them hadn't been laughing alone. But why? Wait, Kirishima suddenly realized. That means you're all the time. Don't even say it. Ojiro stopped him with a slight blush. Of course, clothes have been developed, using her hair as raw material to make her invisible as well. It doesn't bother me that they think I'm a nudist, the invisible girl clarified. It's a valid assumption, but most of the time I wear visible clothes. Anyway, sorry for thinking that about your girlfriend. He wasn't very gentlemanly. Kirishima apologized very seriously. We're not boyfriends. We've only been out a couple of times, Hagakure clarified again. But I don't know. You had to tell everyone, Ojiro said, scratching his chin a little. Everyone was a little amused by the whole thing. Midoriya wondered why the boys at her school were too different from them. It felt almost like everyone was already friends, and it was so natural. I wish I could be like that every day at school. And by the way, what happened to the other boy who was with you before Midoriya? Asked Ashido. The handsome-looking boy would be. I thought the same thing, too, Hagakure agreed. For his part, Tsuyu only thought that this boy looked a bit like his younger brother, so it was impossible for him to consider him entirely handsome. Todoroki had an issue to attend to, and that's why he had to leave early, Midoriya explained. He was a little worried about that, but he was reassured that Mr. Toshinori had accompanied him. In addition to being handsome, mysterious. That just makes it more interesting, Ashido opined, and the invisible girl again seemed to agree with a little laugh. At that, Ojiro and Kirishima made a gesture like a hopeless case. Women. Well, I think we're separated here, Kirishima announced. They all went their separate ways, saying goodbye, and Midoriya felt a little discouraged to be left alone. He was especially disappointed that he had not been able to speak to Uraraka after such a long time. Hey, wait. Deku was shocked, and his heart skipped a beat as he recognized the voice. But he tried to hide it. Uraraka. I'm sorry, they're all gone. I think I got really distracted talking to my dad about his new projects. It's hard to stop him when he talks about architecture, but he looks really happy. They both continued walking towards the station, and discreetly Deku looked back and pinched his cheek to convince himself that it wasn't another dream. Is something wrong? No. By the way, I was very pleased with the volunteers who came today. I've never been in a group like that. Is it so weird? Deku amused Uraraka a little, not believing it. For me, yes. Midoriya looked at the sky with a somewhat lost gaze. It makes me think that if everyone entered the hero course, they would have a great time together. Uraraka realized the sadness of these words and felt a great urge to comfort him. She tried to remember the decision she had made that day at the beach watching him train. But now she realized that it was becoming a hopeless case. Because my feelings for Deku were overflowing now that I saw him again. Uraraka moved a little closer to him and took his hand gently. Deku. You should try to get into the UA. Midoriya immediately felt as if an old wound in his chest was opening up. He had to admit that he had constantly found himself thinking about how he would face the UA entrance exam if he tried. But having someone like Uraraka say it out loud made it all too real. But I promised my mom. Uraraka shook his head. I know she'll understand, he assured her. I know she won't let you give up on your true dream. I'd really like to continue meeting people like today, Midoriya reflected with a slight smile. And I would be very happy to study with you and see you every day. Saying that without thinking, it only took Uraraka a second to start blushing, and she wanted to let go of Deku's hand. But this time he took his hand decisively by the wrist. He, too, seemed surprised by his own reaction, which seemed rather instinctive. P. Erdom. Deku began to say, but he didn't let go, and Uraraka's heart felt more and more turbulent. Uraraka. They both looked into each other's eyes and saw each other's confusion blushingly. I can't believe you forgot the building science project. Now we'll be late, complained Ishido as he walked down the stairs of the station. Ah, but if Midoriya and Uraraka are still here, it shouldn't be that late. They both reacted very frightened, as if their hands were burning, and immediately separated. But it's almost 9 o'clock, Ishido wondered, looking at his watch. Oh, it's too late, said Uraraka. Yes, too late, Midoriya agreed. They both sped up the stairs of the station, separating in the two different directions of the train. What's wrong with them now? Asked Kirishima, and Ishido smiled, slightly amused.